Aloha, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Polynesian Eyes podcast. This is Tua Father from South Central Texas, as well as our co-host, Mr. Aotearoa Masi from New Zealand. And we have a very special guest today, John Loau. We're excited to have him. And I want him to give a quick introduction before we kind of kick into our discussions. But go ahead, John. Appreciate your time. If you want to make a quick intro.
Yeah, sure. Taliaoa, talo falava, and warm Pacific greetings from Aotearoa here in New Zealand and Tamaki Makaurau. For those of you who don't know, I'm Taliaoa Oliva John Loau, the first in my family, born in Samoa, for those of you who are wondering, raised in New Zealand until I was about 7 years old. Then we grew up in Los Angeles, where it's either hot or hotter, as those of us know. So you've been living there, basically schooled my entire life there all the way through. And then eventually we've been back and forth between New Zealand in the early 2000s and then made the final move back here in 2011. So I guess we can learn about everything else. But as we go throughout the podcast, as far as my background is concerned, been involved with police, military, government, former politician, commentator, all of that stuff and in the media. And, at the moment, I'm currently a head of a campus here at the Tisch for Education campus, a vocational university called Ends of the May. I lead the Manukau campus here. We're a health campus. And and former business owner and all sorts of good stuff. But let's get into it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. That means we can go into any direction, which is what we love. We like to go on tangents and, have all kinds of discussions. Los Angeles, that's the only thing hotter than hot in Los Angeles is it's expensive. Right? I mean, my first job out of college was in Southern California.
Yeah.
I worked for a general contractor out there. And, the idea was to live in the Inland Empire because supposedly it was cheaper, right? It was cheaper. So I lived in Rancho Cucamonga, had projects out there at Newport Beach, building for Costa Mesa College, all that kind of stuff. And all I needed was, I think it was just 12 or 13 months. I came home one day, told my wife, start packing. And she goes, what? She's like, yeah, start packing. We're moving. And she's like, where are we going? I don't know. We're just leaving. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a tough place. Traffic, cost of living. Obviously, I mean, at that time, I think gas got up to like $7. And I know in New Zealand, that's like probably normal for New Zealand, but it was like $7.30. And I was spending 3 hours in traffic. And I was like, this cannot be what life's about. So I've moved a lot, right? East Coast, West Coast, now in the Southwest. People, where's your favorite place? I said, I don't have a favorite place. I only have one place I'll never go back to.
Yeah.
California.
Well, inordinately, California's got a super majority of Democrats, right? Leading the state legislature. And of course, most local government, whether it's county or cities, they're generally led by a lot of Democrats. And Los Angeles is no exception to that particular rule. So, if you look at political ideologies, they're very different, right? So, as a Republican, as a member of the GOP, and I joined when I was, I don't know, I think I was like 10 years old, joined the Republican Party. Then I don't think I actually really understood. I just knew that all my friends were in the class were in a particular group when we were learning about government, and everybody seemed to be a Democrat. Nobody wanted to be a Republican for all we knew. Governor Pete Wilson was governor at the time, and I thought, I'll go and join Team Pete, and I just kind of molded into it. But as I got older, you learn the differences between the two, and then you kind of settle in deciding which direction you want to. I think as Samoans, there's an expectation that we lean left and we lean towards the Democratic side of things socially and all those things. But when you look at the political ideology between the two political parties that dominate our space in that time, for me, it was the Republican Party. And so everything around, social conservatives and family conservatives and all those things also leads inevitably towards the money side of things, the financials and the economic side. So where the Democratic side, they kind of look at us and say, you need a hand up because you're brown, and look at all the challenges that are in front of you. And the only way to get through these things is we have to pay for all these services to help you. And that basically means, well, the government has no dollars. Their dollars are our dollars. And so for every program they come up with to help us and help other people, that essentially means taxes upon taxes upon taxes. And that's on all, and that's in all levels of government, where at least in the GOP side, the Republican Party just believes, look, where you need help, you can get the help. It's targeted help. But other than that, we believe that you can pull your strips up. We believe that we can get you to equal footing. And then from there, you should be able to work yourself to success or to failure. Right. But at the end of the day, that would be your choice to make those decisions. So, I get there are other larger discussions and complex discussions around, are things actually equitable? I think it's really kind of facade because, we come from places where in Samoa anyway, there's no benefit. There's no government welfare unless you're an elderly person where you get a pension because you basically have lived that long. Other than that, in Samoa, you just have to live. So you're either going to live off of the land, or if you want to live the modern lifestyle, you want to smoke a cigarette, you want to go to McDonald's, then you're going to have to go get McDonald's money. You're going to have to go get cigarette money. And that means going to work. So we come from places where if you give me a chance, I'll run with it. I don't need all the extra stuff because it's actually not really needed. I just need to show you what I can do. And so that's why I think part of the challenge in California is that we have so many social programs and so many programs, for the benefit of inclusivity and equity and all those things that it almost kind of, makes it unaffordable for those who need it, the low income and the working class. It just makes it hard for us to get forward because, you're just taxes on top of taxes on top of taxes on top of taxes. And you already know in California, the state's taxing you, the county taxes you, the city taxes you, the Board of Education taxes you. And then we have all of these other agencies that have the ability to leverage tax. It's just tax crazy. I don't blame you for leaving.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting too, because like you said, it's just, I just don't know how it's sustainable.
Yeah.
Right. Because my background is in construction.
Yeah.
And we were working with Costa Mesa and they were going to build another $80 million building. And you know how they were going to do it? Tax the people. Right. And they were like, oh man, and the thing is, it's like the people voted for more. I just don't understand. Like me, I was like, holy smokes, how are you going to tax me more? Yeah. But that's what they vote for. So very interesting. Would love to get into the politics and a lot of other things. Actually, our intro video, before we get into it, we have an intro video on the Cook Islands, a little bit of island politics to kind of review. But anything else, Masi? Any comments on that? Or we want
I got one question. No, just one question on the Taliaoa. John, where's that? What's that name and where is it from? Maybe you can kind of explain that name Taliaoa more, because I've always just known you as John. If you can just kind of further explain that, maybe where that name's from.
Yeah, sure. So I was bestowed the title Taliaoa from Awhenga. That's the village, not only where my mom's from, but it's also the village I was born in. And so of the three titles that belong to our family, it's Fatamo, Lolo, and Taliaoa, our families are the stalwarts of those particular three titles, which are pretty well-known titles and governing titles for our district. I was bestowed that title very early on in, I think it was like 2004. So, and that makes me, a Matai in Samoa, but also makes me Matai in the family. So it's one of those opportunities to serve and lead in the family and the overall community. So I've had that title for quite a while. It's quite a heavy one, so you just have to kind of do justice to it as best you can and learn from the other Matais and the elders throughout, your time as a title holder.
Just another question on that, John. Is Taliaoa, I'm assuming it's a li'i title, and are you the only one that's holding on it, or is there multiple people within the family?
Yeah, you are correct. And so in our family, there are multiple members in our family that hold it. However, the interesting thing is that those who are blood in our family are the ones who hold the title. And so in terms of the hierarchy, and that's generally how it works from, different from the Europeans and how their hereditary system works, where hereditary for us works, where if you're coming from a particular bloodline, then you do qualify. And of course, the whole family is involved in deciding and bestowing the title, for those individuals who hold them.
Okay, awesome. That's it for me. Go on. We can move on to that.
Very interesting. I made some notes here because I want to circle back to that concept and have some discussions there. Mm-hmm. But great start right there. So with that being said, we're going to pull this up real quick here and listen to what's going on your side of the pond. This is kind of some interesting. We discussed this whenever our last live was. Yeah. Kind of interesting. I think I had an opportunity to search you up online, John. I think you're also, was it Peters? Masi, what's your guy's name again?
I'm a New Zealand first Winston Peters fan. Yeah.
Winston. I think they mentioned Winston Peters here. So your guys' guy, Winston Peters, is gonna be a point of discussion here, but we'll jump into it.
China and the Cook Islands have pledged to deepen their cooperation with each other and have signed a number of agreements that not even Cook Islanders have the detail on. That could cause some domestic headaches for Cook's Prime Minister Mark Brown, who will face protest and a no-confidence vote in his parliament next week. And despite an agreement between the Cook Islands and New Zealand to consult regularly on foreign affairs matters, Foreign Minister Winston Peters is still also in the dark about what agreements have been inked. Here's Zane again.
With a handshake and the stroke of a pen, Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown and Chinese Premier Li Qiang pledged to deepen cooperation between the two nations in areas including infrastructure and maritime at a ceremony in the Chinese city of Harbin. But the details have not been shared.
In terms of what's been agreed, I think it's probably an economic cooperation. There may be some kind of exchange around environmental goals. It's probably benign, but the fact is we don't know. And it's that uncertainty that creates the difficulties in the relationship that we have with New Zealand and the Cooks.
A spokesperson for Foreign Minister Winston Peters said today, "We note that Prime Minister Mark Brown has publicly committed to publishing the text of the agreements that he agrees in China. For media seeking New Zealand's substantive comment on these agreements, we are unable to respond until Prime Minister Brown releases them upon his return to the Cook Islands."
The lack of transparency is a real concern for any country which professes to be a democracy. And this kind of information should be shared in advance so that people know what's been agreed on by the government.
In 2001, New Zealand and the Cook Islands signed a joint centenary declaration. It states that the Cook Islands interacts with the international community as a sovereign and independent state, but it will consult with New Zealand regularly on foreign affairs matters. Last weekend, Winston Peters said the lack of consultation from the Cook Islands about its talks with China was a matter of significant concern to the New Zealand government. 4 days later, on Thursday, he still hadn't received details from Mark Brown.
We don't know when he will sign the deal, what the deal contains, or when he'll be available for a conversation.
To those who have questioned the level of consultation with New Zealand, let me be clear. Our engagement has been consistent, respectful and open.
But Mark Brown is facing backlash back at home. Cook Islands opposition MP Te Heather has filed a no-confidence motion against the Prime Minister.
The motion will be tabled in Parliament on the first day of the upcoming session, which is Monday 17th.
The Prime Minister's anticipated return from China looks set to contrast the tranquility his island nation is known for.
Very interesting.
Very interesting for sure.
John, any initial reactions?
Yeah, so, with the arrangement between our two countries, right, it's a realm country. It's probably nicer to say realm country than colonized country, but in a modern context that, in the arrangement between New Zealand and the Cook Islands, this is the governing agreement between the two. It's in concert and in consultation. I would probably say that as the Cook Islands continues to grow in their time as a democratic state and how they govern and how they want to interact, the part of the growing pains is whether or not these agreements are fit for purpose, right? And so on our end here in New Zealand, our government's pretty clear. We don't feel that the consultation is at the level that we either expected or used to, where you can see that the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands is saying, I see it's pretty consistent. So I guess the growing pains of being a democracy that's within a realm situation, and as it continues to grow, maybe we're hitting that ceiling where the sweater's just a bit too small these days, and it'll be interesting to see. I am interested to understand what they agreed to. Not because we're nosy, but it's just kind of the people of the Cook Islands have no clue what's been agreed to either. So it's been very general, and most experts understand it. Look, it's definitely going to probably be something we can all live with. It's going to be the traditional things of infrastructure support and climate support and those kind of things. I just think the concern with China is as it grows, its Silk and Belt Road initiative and the other influences that it's trying to impose into the region as a player. I think everyone's kind of trying to, re-examine how they go about doing that. But I think the wider issue is that China has been a consistent partner in the Pacific. They come with a checkbook. Sometimes the checkbook has strings in it. Some countries have been very good at managing those strings, and some countries have been very casual or not as focused on some of the strings when they've accepted the money, and they caught themselves in kind of financial constraints. So I also think that's probably the driving some of the concern as well. A country this close to New Zealand and the agreement between our two countries, what if they get themselves in a financial situation where we may potentially need to go in and bail them out? They don't have their own currency. They use the New Zealand dollar. They don't have their own passport. They use the New Zealand passport. So there are implications of things that we need to consider. But I do find it really interesting that we're here on the 19th and no one still understands what they actually signed.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting, and I didn't realize this, that he's not popular back home, right? So to me, it's a whole different scenario if it's like kind of like Trump, where he has a populist movement. He kind of has a mandate to go out and be bold. Yep. But in this one, I was like, wait a minute, dude. Like, no one at home knows what you're doing, right? Your biggest partner in the region doesn't know what you're doing. This, to me, when I hear stuff like that, I start to hear fraud and corruption and kickbacks, where he's like, you know what, I'm not going to last very long. I'm getting a no confidence vote. That seems to be very popular in our Pacific politics lately. Tonga and talks about it in Samoa. So all kinds of interesting things going on. But Mussy, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I'll probably take a different take on this. I think to me, I see this. It depends on which camp, right? If I'm going to be advocating for the Cook Islands side, I would be like this, because I been in New Zealand for about 7 years now. New Zealand tends to be soft in every approach, and if I'm a Cook Island, I'm going to say I'm just gonna expand, even though I know I'm in the realm and territory. I'm just gonna expand to seek more economic opportunity, and if it hits right, let's just say the people are not popular with it, but let's just say people get to double their income, maybe even get more infrastructure, right? Because obviously he's doing this risk because he's not respecting the amount of money and what the contribution is from New Zealand. I'm just thinking on his side, right? He's like, New Zealand's whatever they give us every year, it's not really that big of a deal. China can probably double, triple. I can probably build better.
Bigger checkbook.
If I build infrastructure, provide a more viable economic growth for my country, I think the people will come around to it. And I feel like he's doing a political, let's just say a political calculation. That's what I'm just thinking. If I'm on his side, I say just go with it, because is New Zealand gonna give me more money next year or the following year? Probably not. New Zealand's currently in a recession, and government are actually trying to grow, are focusing within themselves. They're not looking to splash money around their region. So I'm just looking on from his side. The people are not popular right now because they don't know what's going on. But when things still going, and let's just say if he survives the vote of no confidence, and then maybe a year from now they see some actual economic growth and infrastructure building, I feel like the people will come around to it. And like I said, does New Zealand have the guts to even say, okay, we'll just cut you off? I doubt it. New Zealand's never been that type of country. They're very approach. We're gonna keep talking, keep talking. Yes, yeah. and I feel like the Cook Island PM knows that, right? So that's just me, and just been in New Zealand and how they do things here.
Yeah.
So, and if I'm in New Zealand, Winston Peters, I'm like, if I'm in that camp, I'm like, all right, where's the boundary? When are you gonna say, all right, you know what? You guys create your own passport. You guys create your own currency. You guys create your own thing. And here's the boundary, right? And it's really up to New Zealand on how far they'll take it. Because if they're just going to keep waiting and waiting, then there's really no political pressure to really kind of force the hand of the let's just say the Cook Island Parliament on just getting all these fun, like, because the economy, a lot of the tourists that goes to Cook Island is from New Zealand. That's really kind of been their main economic growth in the Cook Islands, and I see why the Cook Island government are just trying to maybe diversify and actually create a more resilient economy instead of just be fully tourism. So it just depends on which camp you're in, and I can see it both ways. So that's just me. But I don't know. I don't know if you guys had anything from that.
I guess you're giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's doing this for the people, right? That I get. In order for that idea to work, I don't know him very well. I don't know much about him. All I know is
me either.
know,
I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
I'm just like thinking out
Well,
loud.
one thing's for sure, right? Is you have to be pretty clever to get enough people to like you to get yourself elected, right? So you got to give it to him, and vote of no confidence happen quite often. His coalition and his party has the majority. So I don't see that motion passing unless members of his own caucus are thinking, something very different as well. I think stability is key for them moving forward as well. So like you said, Thomas said that it's a calculation that he's had to take. It's definitely about economic resiliency, diversifying, and those things, because they can either continue to sit on the New Zealand tit and keep sucking and thinking, give me more, or is he really being, forward thinking, saying we actually need to diversify. So what does that look like? So, as we're trying to figure out, like, what is it that you did sign? Like I said earlier before, is the arrangement fit for purpose? Is the financial agreement between us and what we fund and what we send money for, is that really kind of fit for purpose, or is it just kind of just money down the drain and it just isn't really kind of working with? And we see that what's happening in the United States at the moment, right? So, we see Elon Musk going after kind of going, we found $50 million in the US aid program that was paying for condoms in Gaza. You know what I mean? And they've been in war for an entire year. I don't really think the money went where it was supposed to. So it's just kind of one of those things. As you said, fit for purpose, and if it's not, how do you repurpose that? And so we've had that in New Zealand. The public service commissioners come out and said, our government, our bureaucracy is not fit for purpose. Tough message to hear. A lot of people are going to be very nervous. But we're probably at a stage now, especially with the Cook Islands, where are they thinking, we need to diversify and this is how we do it? And have they been saying that loudly enough for us to listen? Are we paying attention? New Zealand, are we paying attention? Are we doing what we're supposed to do? So Bauvasa Manaya Winston Peters is probably the best foreign minister we have, and probably one of the best foreign diplomats the world has from a democracy standpoint. So if there's anyone that's going to be trying to handle all of these different balls in the air, it's definitely going to be Winston. But he's only going to be able to work with information that he has, and without that information, it's going to be a bit kind of, well, how do you want us to move forward?
Yeah, John. No, I was just thinking. I always compare this to, just imagine if American Samoa, the equivalent of the prime minister or like the governor of American Samoa, has a little side meeting and goes to China and just does, let's just say, just some kind of partnership. America would not like that at all, and probably they wouldn't even do that. So that's what I'm saying. There's a different approach. Just for him to have taken it to go to China, publicize it, the ceremony of the host signing, like that's, to me, he's already taken this calculation. Because if I see it for the, like, let's just say American Samoa or like Guam, they're territories of the U.S. If any of those territories did anything like that, that would not go well, especially with the current president. So that's what I'm saying. It's very interesting the Cook Islands doing that.
They definitely would get clapped back, right? So the territories, like you said, they definitely would get clapped back real easily, because they'll be told that's not even within your remit. You don't handle foreign affairs.
Correct.
So, you know what I mean? And that'll be an interesting discussion where some, Will Tutuila turn around and go, but we're an autonomous country within your framework. Which could disrupt a few things. Because, we've got Native American reservations all up and down the United States that are autonomous nations.
Nations within a nation.
Within the U.S. But so they all govern within the Constitution and then with that arrangement. So, it is a different scenario with Prime Minister Brown. But I take it that he's a smart cookie and he knows what he's doing. Whether or not people have enough patience and like you said, will results come through? And of course, there's always some palm greasing that inevitably happens when delivering on any of these agreements. And it'll be interesting to see who all of a sudden has a nice new truck.
Well, and that to me, there's a couple things that stick out. Number one, you notice they had to use Chinese media, right? Which to show how secretive that was. He just said, I'm going to China. They're not going to have any access. So they had somehow this New Zealand news outlet got some snippets of the signing. So it says a couple things. Number one, Mr. Brown was saying, I'm a big boy now. Stop me. Right? That's to me what is the number two is China is also saying, stop me. Because in relation to American Samoa and to Guam, China won't even have that conversation.
Yeah.
Because they know there's going to be repercussions, right? So it's kind of a dig into New Zealand that China would do this and that could be part of China's strategy, right? Is to really try and throw their weight around. And I find it very interesting. To me, what makes this really suspicious to me is that the Cook Islanders don't even know. That's what makes it really kind of suspicious to me. It's different where, like I said, we're having a conversation with our team. We made this decision as a team, right? We're going to go forth and do it. But the fact that he's kind of Lone Ranger, and I guess I remember last year covering a topic where a lot of the Pacific was upset with him, and I'm just kind of remembering with the deep sea mining, because he was pushing forward a deep sea mining kind of scenario, and all of the Pacific was saying no for environmental reasons or whatever, and he just said this is good for the Cook Islands economically. So this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because to me it feels like the Cook Islands is just trying to say, no, I want to make my own decisions. I'm ready to move on. And I think I agree with you on that, John. I don't know Winston Peters, but the little bit of snippets, he's a witty guy, and he's also relatively stern and straightforward. He's not like some of your other politicians that's a little overly, concessional, always giving concessions. I think Winston will actually hold the line and hold them accountable to say, hey, look, you got to give us some answers. So interesting. Yeah, that was kind of our break in there, just kind of stretch our minds a little bit. But, John, you had mentioned earlier that you grew up in Samoa. Is that American Samoa, Western Samoa? And kind of give the viewers an understanding of that context and what it was like to grow up in Samoa.
Yeah, so oddly enough, I didn't grow up in Samoa. I was just born in Samoa, and just to give you some context, in New Zealand, we had just passed legislation in 1981 to remove citizenship from Samoans born in a particular time frame. And then part of that was that if you were born by a particular time frame, your citizenship was revoked. And then for anyone post that period, if you were not in New Zealand and you claim to have New Zealand citizenship, if you weren't in the country by 1982 of September, then you would also lose your citizenship. So I was born in November 81, and 1982 April, we were in New Zealand. My parents were just like, we need to go in case our citizenship was taken. And that's that stems from the historical invasion of Samoa at the start of World War I. New Zealand's first act in World War I was to invade Samoa and go, oh, we want to get into the colony game too. So they took in Samoa. And so Samoa was under the administration of New Zealand, on behalf of the Crown. Not that anyone invited them or asked them. They just showed up and said, like, this is what we're doing. So
I did not know that. I did not know that New Zealand actually invaded.
Yeah, they did.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
People try to whitewash that whole thing, but the history is very clear. The orders and the governments, now that the information official documents are coming out that this was a clear invasion, to get into the game of securing New Zealand's footprint in the Pacific. So, the invasion was, and then of course we had the Mau movement and everything else that kind of stemmed from all of that because of the New Zealand's approach to the person they appointed at the time to oversee Samoa. So you fast forward that's how we ended up in New Zealand. People are like, how'd you end up in New Zealand? So I was born in 1981, November 82, April, my parents had moved to New Zealand to ensure that we were able to be here, in Aotearoa. And of course, we lived in New Zealand at a time in the 80s where we had 3 channels. Channel 3 was just coming online. TV was turning off at 9 p.m. You know what I mean? Things were simpler back then and were quite a conservative time at the time. And, you just kind of ran around without shoes and you went to school. And My parents made the move in 1989 to the United States, like every other immigrant, chasing the American dream, just chasing the opportunity to be challenged as well. And we grew up in Los Angeles at that. And like every other immigrant, you show up with what you got in your pocket. You literally with
figure
family
it
members.
out from there.
You figure it out. Yeah, you definitely figure it out from there. It's a bit different for us coming from New Zealand, where, like I said, we had 3 channels. So in context, we showed up in Los Angeles, and we were living in South Central at the time. First of all, I'd not seen that many black people before in my life. Right, the dark-skinned people that I knew were either Fijians or Solomon Islands, but you're all very Kiwi, right?
Pacific Islanders, yeah,
and the whole Pacific vibe, like we've got a different. You could feel it.
There's some really dark Tongans. You probably look like Fijians too. You probably come around.
yeah, exactly. Right? and so the only American black people I knew in my life as a kid at 8 years old was like Webster, Mr. Hanna from Sesame Street, Mr. T, Benson. You know what I mean? But what we see on TV, because we're all the way in New Zealand, we come back, we go to America, in Los Angeles, it's South Central at the time, where that's predominantly black. Where I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. All of these black people, and of course, when you're an Islander, you can pretty much figure out how you're connected. Hey, if you're Samoan, you can figure out how you're all related. If you're Samoan and you know a Tongan, you could probably figure that out through family names. And okay, so that whole, like in New Zealand, it's whakapapa, the whole connection. We can weave ourselves together. I thought it was the same growing up in LA. So of course I'm telling all the black kids in LA, like, hey, are you related to Webster? And they're like, dude, who are you trying to be?
That is hilarious.
I'm like, oh, do you know Mr. T? Because we had brown celebrities on television in New Zealand. Then you'd see them down the road getting a pie, and then when someone goes, oh, that's my uncle, we're like, oh, that's cool. You know what I mean? And that's generally kind of in a roundabout way true. Where I thought, oh yeah, cool. So I'm gonna show up in America, and then of course I'm at an 8-year-old.
That's how I'm going to connect with the others.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know Benson? They're like, bro, do you want to get beat up? So it was really hard, really settling in, because I just didn't understand why people were so intense. And, in the 80s, Los Angeles was just coming out of the crack epidemic. You know what I mean? The crack epidemic, it's just sweeping through, we just finished the Watts riots in the 60s, and just everything sweeping through in the 80s. So it was quite interesting growing up in LA. And then you throw in the fact that, oh yeah, now we're all going to school. Everyone starts doing weird things like the Pledge of Allegiance, and I was like, "Oh, what? This is really strange." And then, of course, it's in English, and then it breaks off in Spanish, and we're like, "Wow, this is really weird English." Like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? It was just
a whole different world.
Whole different world. And so we've discovered very quickly is that, like, in order to keep yourself from getting beat up, and in order to understand everyone, because everyone spoke Spanish, not just like the Hispanic kids, like the black kids, the Koreans who owned the dairy, the Indians who owned the, everybody spoke Spanish and English. And it was just like, okay, we need to learn this weird, funny English that everyone speaks, called Spanish. And we need to ditch the school uniforms, because, we went to school wearing our old school uniforms. And, when you're poor, you just wear the same clothes over and over. And so we were just wearing the school uniforms, and they were like, bro, there's poor, and then there's you guys. Like, don't you guys actually have clothes? You don't even have the right school clothes on. And we're like, but for us, we're like, we're just wearing school uniform. That doesn't make any sense. So we really had a hard time growing up, in LA very early on, because like culturally, you're just trying to figure that out. And then you include the Samoan element. And, Samoans in LA are very interesting in that when they hear, oh, that guy is born in Samoa, they just think you were born in Samoa. So you were born with all knowledge in your head. And they start
by
talking,
osmosis.
Yeah, 100%. They start talking about things, and you're like, "What? I don't understand what you're talking about." So yeah, there was a lot of that, because you're trying to figure out who you are, how to be the next, how to be an American. You start shedding things, you know what I mean, not paying attention to, your Samoa as you're growing up, and into those things, because as a kid you're trying to adapt very, very quickly to this thing called Americanism and how to be an American. When I was going to elementary school, we were still in elementary school, we were doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and then you'd sing all the American hymns, Yankee Doodle went to town, like all of the things that make you American. So you grow up learning all of these nursery rhymes, and we would do that every day to indoctrinate you every day. It's like, this is what it means to be American. And we, in the back of our heads, are like, we want to be American. So this is it. So in the consequence of that was we couldn't be a Kiwi anymore. We had to park that and put that to the side. And inevitably, we couldn't be Samoan either. We have to put that to the side, And so that was really, really interesting. So going to Samoa, later on as an adult was really interesting. So, but yeah, that's just a little bit about that whole
That's
transition.
very interesting. I now, it's kind of interesting you say that just because you were born, the expectation is, well, you must by osmosis, right? You breathe the air on the island. You must know all things. Must you look like you were going to have a question earlier?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say when New Zealand invaded Samoa, was New Zealand invaded Samoa during the time when Samoa was still under German ruler? Okay, all right. So that because I remember reading to that history that was New Zealand's reason for invading because it was from Nazi Germany. So they wanted to invade Samoa. So I just want to just clarify that if that was the case.
So New Zealand can actually claim they took on the Germans, huh? That's
Well,
got to make you feel good, feel tough.
You imagine you're working the plantation and the flag goes down and another one goes up. You're like, well, what's that? Oh, you're New Zealand.
What's that? What happened? Yeah.
Okay, well, that doesn't change. I still got to go get the taro. I still got to go fishing. You know what I mean? For us, our people were like, oh, okay, who invited this batch here now? So
it's really interesting because kind of the same thing. Masi and I guess we did the reverse of what you did, John. Right? You kind of were born in Samoa, quickly moved to New Zealand, into the U.S. Masi and our siblings, we were kind of born in the U.S. but quickly moved to Tonga. And it's funny because it's kind of the similar things, but in reverse, right? Because there's you're trying to fit in, but everybody knows you're different. Right? Where they're like, like I was telling Masi, I don't know of a single rugby game in Tonga where as you're lining up for the kickoff, it's like clockwork. There's always at least one or two guys that will say, leave the palangi to me. Right? Where it's funny because in my head, I know my mom is palangi, but in my head, I was just Tongan. Right. And then you always behave that way, but always inevitably people will have to remind you. So it's an interesting dynamic from your perspective with such a fluid environment. Like you're saying, you did a quick transition to New Zealand. You're just probably starting to identify as a Kiwi. Then you're coming to the US. Then there's that whole shift again. The only reason why I want to ask and get your perspective now that you look back, because I know a lot of our viewers are Polynesians living out in New Zealand, Australia, and the US. There is a huge draw of what does it mean to be Samoan or Tongan or Fijian growing up in a foreign context. From your perspective, like what have you drawn, growing up in a fluid environment, having to set these things aside? How have you decided these are the parts that are most important to me, right? And how do you mesh those different cultures and environments to create who John is now back in New Zealand, back to very early in your journey, if that makes sense? I know that was a long question.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so it's a question that many people today spend a lot of time reflecting on, right? Because the diaspora population is so large and vast. And I think because of the technology today, we're able to have these conversations. Our generations we're able to have those conversations, right? We have the conversation with mom and dad, and they just go, hey, you Samoan, cut it out.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting answers I've heard was when the Right Honorable Fiame Mataafa came to New Zealand when she first became Prime Minister of Samoa. And I was at AUT when she was, meeting, and a PhD student got up and said, I'm at the moment writing a paper on the va, the space, the sacred space, and and how to give space. And she had a bit of a chuckle, and she's listening to the person, and she said, I don't mean it. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just. She said she just finds it really interesting. No matter where she travels around the world, even before she was prime minister, Samoans in every diaspora group when she's visited have all talked to her about the va, right? And what does it mean to be Samoan, in this context? And her answer and her reply was really interesting around the, what does it mean to be Samoan, especially when you're diaspora and you're living abroad. And, and she's correct, I guess, in her analysis, in that Samoans in Australia, very different. And they also differ between regions, right? Sydney Samoans, very different from the ones that are living in Brisbane, very different. Because of those small nuances that do differ, You know, that's what distinguishes that particular group. There's the underlying things that make us all common Samoans, but that we're uniquely in that space. So, you know, like New Zealand Samoans, we can tell very, very quickly, like, oh, geez, we're very different from them. And I guess in New Zealand, we tend to feel like we're more closer to Samoa, so we tend to feel that we're more authentic to to being Samoan. And then you get to Samoa, and they just kind of giggle and they go, "Are you from New Zealand?" They're like, "Yeah, oh, okay, well, we don't do that. Right? We don't do it this way." You know, they're like, "Oh, okay. Well, we were always taught because every community we grow up in, we are being raised and taught the Samoa way. But because there are changes and differences, and those nuances have to come into play, the culture itself shifts to that, and it becomes the norm, you know, in that space. So, my sisters and brothers who are living in LA, who are making their transition here to New Zealand, very interesting watching them now. Because they're all coming in and they're like, "Oh yeah, we do this, we do it that, we do it this way." And I just sit there and go, "Who told you we do it that way?" Like, "Oh, that's how we do it in America." I said, "Oh no, that's how we do it in LA. LA Samoans are very different. So don't go grouping all of America together for once because we're not the same." You know, I saw it when I was in New Mexico. I saw it when I was in Dallas and Samoans out in Florida. Like, there's just those very obvious changes that are very distinct, unique, particularly to those regions. So you're just kind of going, "Oh, well, yep, those are Kansas Samoans. That's how they roll. That's how the Salt Lake Samoans. That's how they roll." And so when I look back and I reflect back on my own time, and what does it mean for me to be Samoan? Because I've lived abroad a lot and have not really had a real stable place, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like, what does being Samoan mean to me? For me, I've just simplified it to, what do my parents define Samoan for me, and I just roll with that, right? Because that's been the easy for me. Because when I look back at I've been here since 2011. I look at back at the Samoans in Carson and in Compton and Long Beach, and I'm just kind of like, "Ooh, we don't do those things." But I get that everyone there does it that way. So I go, "Oh yeah, cool. That's uniquely Samoans who are living, in Southern California, where, very different from the ones who live in Kukuila, Tituila Samoans. I'm sure they're like, oh, you guys don't know what you're doing." But so I think that's for me when I'm looking at, like, how do you define, for me anyway, I've had to turn to mom and dad now that everybody's growing up and they're not worried about raising kids and everything else like that. Now I can just sit down and go, "Hey, what are these things? And can you define those things for me? And how important are these things?" Especially as a Matai now, it's just like, well, do I need to be involved in this conversation? Do I need to be practicing this stuff this way? And so it's been an interesting journey for me to loop back to them, because when they were trying to teach me what it is to be a Samoan, I wasn't interested. I was always like, "Oh, no, I'm just going to go to Taco Bell and I don't want to eat kalo. I'm just going to go down the road to, Rosalitas. And, I'm going to eat Mexican rice, not just steamed rice." And so now as an adult, I'm looping back to them because I see that as distinctively Samoan that I grew up with very early on, and I just drifted away from it. But and I see all the other things, and I think, oh, that's a bit confusing for me. I'm not interested in that version of what it means to be Samoan. So I'm more interested in what mom and dad think Samoan should be, and then just kind of nurturing those discussions and those learnings with them.
No, 100%, and I 100% agree with that, because even within villages, right? Yeah. And then even within families, right? One of the first things I told my wife when she's like, "What does it mean to be a Tongan?" And I said, "Hold on, let me tell you something. There's, like, how people behave different in Tongan. There's some common threads, but I wouldn't say my family acts like the normal standard Tongan experience. Because when we grew up, my dad was like one of those strict guys, right? Like, we couldn't go hang out if it wasn't cooking for a funeral or wedding or something. Those were the few times we could be away from home. Apart from that, it was just home, school, the farm. Home, school, the farm. That's all we did. And some of my friends never did any of that. But any thoughts on that, Masi?
No, I agree. Just with the whole identity thing, especially with Polynesians who live abroad, trying to understand and people. There's a lot of misconceptions too, even from, like, people who are, like, in New Zealand, Australia, who are non-Polynesians, think that we're all just acting in one unison of, this is what it means to be a Samoan Tongan, when it's totally different. Like you said, even within the villages, like where we kind of grew up from, even in Samoa, different villages have different rules. One, you can ride the bike during the sa when they blow their horn. There's some you can't ride the bike. You have to sit down and wait.
Yeah, wait.
Till the sa is done. So that's and I think it's good for our Polynesian, because the diaspora is growing a lot, who are living most of their lives in America, Australia, and New Zealand. That even with amongst ourselves, we're very different. Me being Tongan, I'm gonna be different on how I think we should do a birthday celebration compared to the other Tongan family. There could be the same nuances of giving our treasure koloas, or like, our treasure beasina, the show Samoa. We can do it'll be the same kind of thing, but the way of delivering it, there's little differences, and I agree with that, because every family is different. The village plays a big part. Even you kind of mentioned it too. Even our parents, right? The way they teach, they help you grow up is different. And there's many Tongan families that I love them. They don't if you're a daughter, or you're the female in the household, you're treated a bit special, right? In love the Tongan families. In my household, my dad, you're a male, female. If you didn't listen, you're all getting the same. You're all getting the same beatings, right?
Yeah.
See, that's a different concept, and just within our household compared to other Tongan families.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with you, John. And us going in abroad, we're just picking on what makes us feel comfortable, and what we deem is and what you take from your culture to make it you have to be comfortable in your own skin, so that when you explain to other fellow Samoans, other fellow Tongans, this is you, and we're a bit different, but we still have the same goal on trying to promote Samoan or Tonga to the world kind of thing. But that's
you got I tell listeners that, like, you got to make sure you don't put too much pressure on yourself. Right, because you can crush yourself under that weight. So we all know Seoli Dwayne Johnson, probably one of the biggest stars out there in general. But we see his in the world, right? So I like using him as an example, because I tell people all the time that, because we've had similar journeys, going from the United States into New Zealand, go back to the US, and that kind of stuff. I have more hair than him is probably the only difference, but probably some more bank accounts as well. But if you look at his journey culturally, right, the more comfortable he becomes, with his Samoan, you see the integration of those things in his films, right? He's just like he's 100% confident in this very little small snippet, and then he enters it in. So I can't remember the name of the movie that he did it, but he did that. He did one film, and then there was that one line, "Hey, kasipo alumoy," you know what I mean? And he got slammed how grammatically that just wasn't correct, right? And I thought, oh, typical, right? Typical people are just going, instead of going, "Hey, he's trying," you know what I mean? And I thought, and hearing from Auntie Ata and the rest of the family, how he was a bit hurt by the whole thing, because he thought he was doing something great, and he, you know what I mean, and he was just like, I'm trying, I'm trying, and the first thing they can do. So he's pretty good at clapping back at people as well. But I think it's can we make the mistakes safely, and can the correction be nurtured properly if you're trying to teach someone versus just slamming them? And it's different if he had a PhD in Samoa, and you know what I mean? Yeah, okay, cool, go at him. So I think he's quite a good example as a diaspora person, that as he's more comfortable with with his own journey as a Samoa, you see him doing the his dances and everything else. That as he's more and more in tune with those things, he introduces those things as every day, and that's where, for me, going back to mom and dad, you kind of go, well, if I need somewhere to safely make a mistake, it will be with them. Because you know what I mean, I'm not 10 anymore, so they're not smacking me across the ear, kind of going, "Hey, how many times have we said that to you?" It's I'm an adult now, where they can kind of go, "No, that's son. This is how you enunciate, and this is the tone, and this is how it works for you." And I go, "Oh yeah, cool." So, and as I've gotten more comfortable with with aspects of language and greetings and things, I've introduced those in written format when I send emails, when I'm out speaking publicly, and those things when I speak to students, when I speak to people in public, those are the things. So, for your listeners and those who are viewing, don't put pressure on yourself, because you can crush yourself under that stuff, because the expectation that you're perfect is not going to be it, because of the diversity in the delivery, whether it's in the villages, from family units, and then culturally right abroad. So if you're an American and you live in your Samoan and you live in the United States, just be that. If you're Samoan and you're gonna embrace that, go do that. If you're living it, to go do that. and don't measure yourself against what everybody else is doing, because it's not within the context that you're living in. So yeah, just some views on that.
No, and I 100% agree with that. And it's not worth crushing yourself, like you said, John, because it's under whose version, right? Yeah. Like you said, there are so many versions and strains of quote unquote to do it correctly, right? And the truth is, just like in life in general, you're never going to satisfy everyone.
100%.
Right? But you want to do your best. And I think this is Mussey's motto, right? Because Mussey's done a lot more things and speaking stuff than I've done. But it's you go do your best, and then that's it. That's what you should be looking for. Your best. It's no different whether it's in sports, business, relationships. No one's going to be perfect. You go in, you do your best, and as you do your best, you'll learn a little bit here, a little bit there. You add it into your skill sets, right? And in just like in construction, that's why experience is so treasured in construction, because everyone makes mistakes. As you're going into construction, you make a mistake. Oh my gosh, that cost us a lot of money, but you have that in your pocket and you add that. That's also what I'm seeing in our discussion about what it means to be Tongan or Samoan or a Kiwi or Tahitian Cook Islander. It's a journey, right? You're never going to get there. Maybe that's the best way to put it. You're never going to be quote unquote Samoan 100% or Tongan or whatever. It's the journey of trying to get there, right? It's chasing after that goal. It's getting better little by little, and you don't want to, choke your growth by being too afraid or by listening to the naysayers like The Rock. Man, the fact that he's willing to inject that, everybody should be cheering for that, because that puts everybody else on notice that, hey, there's a group of people, they're talented, they're willing to go out of the box. But I appreciate that. I wanted to talk more about the Matai kind of understanding and the structure. Very interesting to me. I'm not very familiar with it. Help me understand how this concept of multiple people holding a title, that's new to me. That's I guess maybe coming from a Tongan paradigm. We see a title and it's like, well, one person holds that title at a time. Kind of help. Very interesting. And I think there's a cool story on Tongan history this is why it's important to adopt new ideas, right? And to make it fit for yourself, because as part of this podcast, there's a very interesting interplay between Tongan and Samoan politics that eventually saves Tonga. But I want to understand a little bit more on that context of the Matai and how that operates.
Yeah, so the Matai, so our society itself is really structured on the extended, right? Which is really interesting. Not the nuclear family, but the extended. So by setting up our society that way, that means that we have to take care of everybody, and in order to do that, you need to put things in charge and put people in charge. So that's how the Matai system in general. And then I'll just premise that I'm not an expert in this space. So if for any of you
all good,
who are, it'd be great for you to chime in. And so at least from our family structure, so there are titles that are tied to districts, right? There are titles that are tied to villages themselves, and then there are titles that are tied to families or events. Right. The most famous one is probably the leaving of the Tongan king, from the shores of Samoa after that war, and the whole, Maria Letoa, eventuating to Maria Toa, right? So these titles, are either significant names that mark a particular type of event, or even a specific duty or particular aspect. So that's how you govern, those two things. And so in our family, is Maulolo, Fata, and Taliaoa. Those are the three who were attached with Mariatoa as part of that whole that whole space as well. So with us, Matais have basically responsibilities that they're given, right? So that's your responsibility as a Matai. Those fall under your direction, whether you're a talking chief, you're a sitting chief, whether you're the head of the family, the sa or the sa or the family. Those things are pretty much tasked to those specific individuals. So it's very different from from a European structure that we're used to. You would, where you have a single person at the top, you have the monarchy at the top, and then you have, I guess, senior management. You got dukes and lords and those things, and then you get lower lower management with earls and the viscounts and everyone else, and the knights and everyone else, right? So that's quite a pyramid structured system, where we have the Matai system. So they have the authority to govern and to basically run things. And so in order to qualify for your Matai title, families decide that, right, for titles that belong to families, and then sometimes the wider village and or district will decide those things depending on. So in Samoa, I think we have 4 paramount families. They're quite heavy title families, and of course, if we want to get a monarchy going, then essentially is you have to claim all 4 of those, and that's quite a long process because that requires a lot of Taliaoa, meeting with families, getting people to agree. You know what I mean? There's exchanges of land, exchanges of gifts, and those things in order to demonstrate your ability to articulate yourself to hold these titles, because the title is the most important, not the individual. So when I have this title from a hereditary standpoint, you know what I mean? That doesn't mean my son automatically gets it. That means it will return back to the family for the family to decide. Does Taliaoa, does Ezra, my son, does he qualify to hold the title? So if you look at Taliaoa anyway, at least in this context, it means to wait or to expect. And so one who waits or one who's expectant. So quite often we're the ones who are kind of watching, seeing what's going on. There are a lot of Taliaoas who tend to sit in a judiciary kind of standpoint to handle disputes. So we tend to kind of sit and kind of listen and watch and see what's going on to try to get through really the heart of issues and then come up with solutions and those things, at least from my experience in our family context. So yeah, it's quite an important title. When I got mine, I was quite nervous, because I was like, my Samoa was not great, and then the Matais themselves have an eloquent dialect that they speak. And so, there was that nervousness, there was that pressure of like, oh my God, how am I supposed to articulate myself as a Matai? Well, there's only one way to do it. You sit and watch, as
listen and observe. Yeah.
Observe and then speak up. Because that's the whole thing, is that, a lot of times in the learning process, we sit and we watch. When we have a question, we don't ask. You know what I mean? Because we are afraid of being smacked down or being criticized on those things. So it's finding those people that we can talk to help nurture us, through those conversations. So, and of course, some of these titles are tied to land and other responsibilities as well. So quite often you get a phone call from the village or from the head of the family saying, hey, you hold this title. These titles are bound to these sections of land. You need to be part of these conversations. So that kind of really then kind of elevates the heart rate a little bit, because you're kind of going, oh, you can help determine the fate of not only what happens to land, but people live on this land, and what do we do? So
it impacts lives.
Yeah, 100%. So the other, the general system that we're pretty familiar with, where the monarchy sits at the top and the hereditary lines, work the way they do. That's a very different system, because it is a single individual, right? So I can hold the title of Taliaoa. Other family members in my generation, the males, hold the title of Taliaoa. And what that does is it spreads responsibility across everybody's shoulders. So for those of us who are diaspora or Samoa or Tonga, Niuean, whatever your culture, if you're not really steadfast and an expert in that space, that's okay too, because your cousin and other people hold the title for you to learn from. So you're able to sit and observe, especially from from the ranks that you're within. So that's why we spread that out as well, because the reality is that we're all busy, right? If you remove all the modern day stuff, we'd all still be busy at the plantation. We'd all still be busy with church. We'd all still be busy with village things and those kind of things. So you spread out these titles that particularly belong to, like I said, the district, the village, and the family, so that everybody has a part to play. And everyone knows what the part is, because if that's speaking title, you're doing speaking. Speaking titles aren't going to go over here and run the show. It's like, hey, this is your space, work within your space. And everyone understands that and gets it. And the hard work that goes into ensuring that you do well is reflected in the title. Not, Thomas, you did really great. It's the title, that says, oh, yeah, you've done the title service. Because, we see the scandals going on with some of the more, scandalous members of the royal family. You see all that other stuff where it's like, oh, you're embarrassing yourself and your family. No, you're also embarrassing the title. So, our instant reaction would be, we need to remove the title away from this individual. If you're still going to go off and play, and be scandalous, then we remove the title, so you're not injuring the title itself, because the title needs to maintain its not only its sovereignty but its sacredness as well. So it's quite important to yeah. So when you're getting a title, especially as a Samoan, really think that through, and when you're out there doing those things, because it's not just about embarrassing yourself or family or putting pressure on yourself and your family. It's actually the title itself. So you don't want to undervalue or devalue that as well. But for your benefit of your viewers, in my village, the rules are very different compared to other village. In Awhenga, women don't hold titles. They hold positions of importance and authority, but they don't hold matais. And in my dad's village, Taliaoa, where the Loau title comes from, women don't also hold titles there either. There are other villages that do and allow that. So we see that with Fiame, Matafat. So they will hold the title, and others are able to hold titles. But it's very interesting for my sisters as they grow up, and they're trying to get in the power play game, and they're trying to make decisions around things where quite often I'm like, hey, you don't get to make those decisions, but I'm going to take your feedback, and I can feed that through. I have to be your mouthpiece because you can't, and of course that clashes with the Americanism of, what do you mean? I have a right to speak that. I'm like, maybe
you have a right to speak to me, right? As your brother.
No, I was gonna say, John, they can find somebody from a different village that allows women to have matais. They can marry you to that one. Hey, man, you can always figure it out. You can always figure it out.
I tell my sisters, you were born in the wrong village. You come from the wrong family.
Yes. Yeah.
My sisters
you can
very
marry.
Smart,
you can marry into the right village, though. Yeah, right. That'll help with the
Yeah.
selection process.
That's it. But
No, just want to say thank you to John. Really love having these conversations. I learned a lot of things. This is one of the reasons why, people that write us on the podcast and say thank you and all that stuff, I feel a little guilty because I learned so much doing this. This is one of the drivers behind it. I learned a lot of things. Great to meet great people that are out there doing things. But once again, John, very grateful for your time, and it was a pleasure.
For our viewers, we always leave two things with you all. One, stay curious, and two, always ask the hard questions. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Awesome.
Thank you. Peace.